side of your screen, there is a questions panel, and I'd like to encourage you all to ask questions to the speakers as we go. Please send the questions to the box. It comes to me here as a facilitator, and I will be directing the questions to our distinguished speakers as they come in. This is really a live discussion, and therefore that's really important to have your questions, and they will be asking the speakers to give their frank and honest feedback in terms of what you're asking. Now, if you're having trouble connecting to this event, I just want to let you know that we also have a non-interactive live stream on YouTube. So you can really listen to this discussion if you are somewhere in the deep field with poor internet connection. Please click to the connection to the YouTube, and you will be able to follow it in a much better quality as we go through. We have also prepared a number of background documents that are relevant to today's webinar, and all this is available at the website. We tried to ask speakers, they have prepared some practical notes, some guidance notes, the field examples to make it really easier for all of you to be able to take forward. Really, the objective of today's webinar is to give you the tips, to give you the recipe, the practical steps, so you can take and apply the accountability to affected people in your own operation in the best possible way that, of course, fits your program. Today's webinar will go for about 90 minutes or so. About the first 45 minutes, I will be asking a question or two to each of the 5 speakers that we have this morning. In the second half, I will be taking the questions that you're sending us live from all over the world. So please keep on sending questions, and I'll do my very best to take them and really get the speakers to answer your questions. I also want to highlight that we have an open poll. Please take a minute to answer. There are 3 very short, basic questions. We're just trying to get a better understanding on who is in line and how much knowledge there is on AAP. At the end of today's webinar, there's going to be a feedback poll where I also want to encourage you to take a minute at the end to click to these multi-questions and give us your feedback on how you found today's webinar, what was the most useful part that is put in place. And actually, as of this morning's webinar, we're introducing an additional measure, which is all of you who attended in a month's time, we're going to come back to you and just ask you for your feedback in terms of how much of what you heard this morning you were able to put in practice. We're really trying to measure a little bit the impact of these webinars and that it has on the operations themselves. So on this note, I'd like really to introduce our panelists, and I'm delighted we really have a number of distinguished panelists with us this morning. I'll introduce them all. So I'm delighted that we have online Jasmine Whitbread, who is the Chief Executive Officer for Save the Children International. Jasmine is also the champion at the Interagency Standing Committee for Accountability to Affected People, and it's really fantastic that in her heavy schedule we're able to have her live, and she will be answering live. She will be with us up until about 1/2 the hour, so for until the next 20 minutes to answer questions. We also have online Toby Lanzer. Toby is the Humanitarian Coordinator. He's based in Juba in South Sudan. He's the Deputy Representative of the Secretary General to the operation, the United Nations mission in South Sudan, UNMISS. Toby comes also with a long experience, having worked in multiple operations in Timor, in Darfur, in Central African Republic, in Angola, in Chile, in Georgia, and has been in this role since 2012. We also have Nicholas Seris, who works with Transparency International. He's actually the Global Advisor on Accountability and Aid Integrity. He's based in Kenya, and he's joining us from Nairobi this morning. Nicholas also has more than 15 years of experience in managing both development and humanitarian programs in Africa and the Middle East. And Nicholas will be sharing the Kenya example. I'd also like to introduce Sutapa Hollander. Sutapa, who was the Accountability to Affected People Advisor at the Philippines. She's actually joining us from Australia this morning, or this evening for her. But Sutapa was last year in the Philippines, which was one of the L3 operations, and she will be sharing with us her experience. Sutapa is a public health expert, and she has also worked in a number of operations, more recently coming from West Africa, where she was dealing with the Ebola crisis there. And lastly, but not least, here with me in Geneva, we have Prita Low. Prita is the co-chair of the Interagency Standing Committee Task Team, which is based here in Geneva and includes a number of organizations on accountability to affected people and the prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse, PSEA. Prita is her other function. She's the Deputy Director at the Division of International Protection at UNHCR here at the quarters in Geneva. And she also comes really with an extensive field experience, having worked in Asia, in the Balkans, in Africa, both on policy but also on implementation and operations, with a particular focus on community participation and protection. So I just want to say really a warm welcome to all the speakers and to all of you to today's discussion. Before going in, I just want to say two words that I really think most of you are aware of, but it's related to the fact that in 2011, the Interagency Standing Committee principles came up with basically the 5 commitments, which translated into a protocol. I'll just flag them very briefly, and I'm sure Jasmine will want to comment more of that. But basically, we're talking the 5 commitments that the principles of both UN and NGOs organizations agreed to is, first of all, is the importance of leadership and governance, really making sure that this mechanism on accountability to affected populations are integrated in the country strategies. They are in the program proposals. They're included in recruitment. They are really included in training, in performance management, in the partnership agreements. Leadership and governance is crucial on applying the accountability to affected people. The second principle is transparency, and this is about providing timely and information to affected populations so that they can influence and make decisions. They can have choices. There has to be a dialogue, an open and transparent dialogue with the affected populations in real time, really to help and influence the informed decision making. The third principle is related to feedback and complaints, and this really includes the fact that we all need to be actively seeking the views of the affected people in order to improve the practice, the policy, the programming. And this is really what we often see as a missing gap. We get perhaps the information, but do we really go back and readjust the programming based on the feedback that we get? And this is what we will be hearing from our speakers this morning. The fourth principle relates to the participation. And this is really making sure that the affected populations play an active role in decision-making process that affects them through the practices that are put in place at the operation level. And then the fifth principle is about the design, the monitoring, and the evaluation. Really the fact that we need at any time
We seem to have just momentarily lost Panos. He's back. Apologies, everyone. We're just having a few sound quality issues. Passing over to Panos.
All right, I hope you can hear me. I'm sorry there was a technical problem. So just to continue, basically I just highlighted the 5 principles that really were adopted at this very important decision made in 2011 by the AAC principles. And I'd actually like to go to and ask the first question to Jasmine, who is joining us from London. And Jasmine, as the IC principle champion on accountability to affected people, what have the principles done to advance the accountability to affected people in humanitarian operations? What was really the vision of the IC champion for improvement of the humanitarian response and inclusion of AAP? Jasmine, over to you.
Thanks very much, Panos, and hello, fellow panelists, Preeta, Toby, and everybody else online. It's fantastic to see a community of people growing, which it has been, I think, over the last several years, really dedicated to improving the humanitarian's ability to be accountable to people affected by disasters and the humanitarian catastrophes. And I think that we have seen a lot of progress, and at the same time, I think we're all frustrated by the very patchy nature of that progress. I think hopefully, you know, like me, I'm pretty sure you're all online because you will have seen this working in practice on the ground, whether it's a notice board in a distribution of, you know, food or non-food items that really lays out clearly to people, you know, who could be expected to get, you know, what items over what period of time, or whether it's in fact now with mobile phones it is possible to have complaint system working. I'm not sure how, for example, in Satari camp it's working, but I was very impressed to see that there is a 1-800 number that people can call if they've got complaints. And this is something that, you know, we used to dream about a decade ago, and now is being able, you know, we are able to do that in different places. But as I say, it's very, very patchy. So the idea at the Interagency Standing Committee was to try and start at the top, because a lot of things were sort of bubbling up from the bottom, and that's all good and that needs to be given oxygen, but also to start with the principles and say, you know, what are we prepared to sign up for? And those 5 principles that Panos has just gone through were debated, and I think just having the conversation at the heads of the agencies around these 5 principles was very important, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about accountability to affected populations still. There's a lot of acronyms used, there's luminous kind of guidelines, and even those 5 principles I think could probably be simplified, to be honest. I think they're pretty much covered by number 1, which is the leadership and governance, which is that, and this was the vision, was that all of us as heads of agencies sitting around the table at the Interagency Standing Committee would be able to demonstrate our commitment to accountability to affected populations by really ensuring that it is central to our agency standards and processes, you know, starting all the way from the design of programs, proposals to donors, through to, you know, the recruitment of staff, the inductions, the trainings, the performance management of staff, the monitoring and evaluation of the programs, you know, the partnership agreements included, and reporting back against those standards that that should be not seen as an add-on, but seen as very much core and central to what we're doing as an agency, and to the extent that there are now increasingly standards across the humanitarian system. I hesitate to call it a system, it's a bit chaotic, but you know, the core humanitarian standard, for example, that all of the NGOs have really got behind, making sure that we see this issue as central and not as an added, an add-on, a luxury, if you like. So that was the vision, and it was great to have that conversation amongst the heads of agencies, and everyone was totally up for signing up to this. I mean, there were a lot of questions around it, but in the end, everyone said yes, absolutely. Where are we in implementing it? I think, again, it's patchy, not surprisingly. Valerie and I wrote to all of the agency heads a little less than a year ago and said, please, can you report back in a very simple way? We didn't want to make a bureaucracy about how we are doing, how each of you are doing, you see yourself as doing against those 5 principles. We haven't actually, disappointingly, we have not heard back from all agencies. So that is a disappointment. Okay, it's been a very, last year was an extraordinarily challenging year for all of us. But we are keeping the pressure on. I think OCHA could play a stronger role, if I'm honest, in terms of the follow-up and holding agency heads accountable for what we all signed up to doing. And those who did report, I think what we're seeing is that there is a stronger understanding, and this is not new, a stronger understanding around the communications and involvement of people affected, and less evidence of really getting behind this issue of transparency and particularly feedback and complaints. So that's my view of where my vision is. We should get there, and we should get there as fast as possible in terms of implementing these principles. And where are we on that? We're sort of some way on the journey. I'd say we've made some good steps, and I think we should celebrate things that have been achieved. And that's why I'm really pleased to hear that on this webinar we're going to be talking about examples, real life examples, because I think this has got to be carrot more than stick. And the carrot is actually seeing the quality programs, the results, which is what we're all after when you do build this into your programming. So maybe I'll stop there.
Jasmine, thank you very much. Practically, at the moment on this webinar, we have a number of humanitarian coordinators for operations, senior leadership from really multiple countries in Africa and Asia. So as a champion, what would you like to see happening in terms of leadership at the field level to bring the accountability to affected people to life in operations from a collective perspective? Over to you.
So I think, those 5 principles that you set out, they are quite straightforward, and I think it is great to see, and I know that some of you humanitarian coordinators and certainly agency heads in the field are doing this already, but I'd like to see it much more common practice that, any coordination meeting, any program looking at particular response starts with those principles, that those are sort of pasted up on a wall somewhere, and they're very much central to the agenda, and that every emergency is different, so it's unlikely that all 5 of those principles will be taken forward beautifully, and resources are always limited, but it would be great to see a focus, an appropriate focus on 1 or 2 of those areas. For me, what I'm particularly passionate about, because I think it can make a huge difference, is the notice boards that can go up and just be really clear with pictures, and a phone number, which will have to be properly manned, and it's easier said than done. But I think those are very practical steps that can make a huge difference in terms of addressing that power balance that you were talking about earlier on, Power.
Great, thanks, Jasmine. We actually got a couple of questions to you that I'd like to pass on, and actually there is also a very specific recommendation that comes from the field. So the questions we have is, there is a sense that despite the ISC principles, commitment and communication, and that took place in 2001, as you said, it's a patchy situation. In some places it's applied a lot more by individual agencies, very little by the collective. So what further commitment do you see that the principles or further steps need to take really to make sure that the elements you spoke about, being part of training or performance appraisal and so on, is really put to action at the field level? And the question, of course, is some agencies have done it more than others. There is a sense that there has to be a further reminder, reinforcement, action at the principles level, particularly now with the departure of Valerie, a new emergency relief coordinator coming on board. And there is a recommendation that comes that says perhaps it should be on every humanitarian coordinators and also senior leadership job description and annual plan, including in their appraisal, to present an AAP plan for the operation and the country. Jasmine, what are your thoughts?
Well, I definitely think that it should be in the as part of the appraisal, and that is, in fact, that's already been agreed. We debated that as heads of agencies, and that is in the first principle. Very explicitly, it talks about including staff performance management. I think I would be a little hesitant about a sort of a cookie-cutter approach in terms of sort of dropping in a standardized objective, because, as I say, every situation is slightly different, and you've got to be practical as well in terms of what resources and what the top priorities are, etc. But you can always be doing something on accountability to beneficiaries. So I do think that this is it's not an all or nothing. And I do think that it has been agreed by at the highest level that it should be part of performance management, and I would agree with the suggestion that we ensure that happens. And that's one of the things that we're asking people to report on and say, is that happening? And I think what we have to do is just be more rigorous, and I think that's where OCHA can play a role, because it's the coordinating agency, in just really insisting now on follow-up to these commitments that have been made and asking for reporting against that. But also, it's not just the stick, it's also the carrot. So where, brave moves have been made on performance management, either somebody's done it really, really well, they need to be, really given credit for that very visibly, and maybe we could think about some awards or, some way, some forum in which we can reward that and sort of incent that behaviour. And I think it would also be great to hear from agencies of where they've actually sanctioned performance, where they said, yeah, you managed to do all the distributions or whatever it is, but actually you weren't taking account of affected populations and how we can be accountable to them and transfer some of the power. So I think some examples there would help.
Thank you, Jasmine. I think indeed it's having the best examples, and this is what we're trying to do this morning with these 3 case studies, but also having a tighter accountability, the role of OCHA supporting, but also the role of the collective to make sure that at the field level, the right practical steps and advice and support is in place. And today we will be talking about also where could operations go to get this support in order, from a practical point of view, to apply it in their operation, regardless whether it's a level 3 mega emergency or a medium operation, or an operation which is really more into a recovery phase, moving from humanitarian emergency to development. Jasmine, I really want to thank you for joining us this morning live in this session, and we're looking forward to hearing you again later on this afternoon, where we repeat the session. So thank you very much. I'd like now to move to our second speaker, Toby Lanzer. Toby is joining us live from Juba. As you know, South Sudan is really an L3 operation. It's the largest operation in Africa at this moment, a very complex one with an integrated mission. And we're really delighted to have Toby for many reasons here. One of the important and first commitment that actually Jasmine talked about was the role of leadership. And Toby, this is where your leadership on implementing the accountability to affected people in such a large operation like in South Sudan is really crucial. So Toby, I'd like to ask you if you could really share with us some of your thoughts and reflections on, from a practical point of view, on how you brought these 5 commitments of the accountability to affected people into life in the Southern Sudan operation. Toby, over to you.
Thank you very much, Panos, and I hope that everybody can hear clearly. I am working in a place which is probably unlike many of the places where participants are sitting today. Not only is this a particularly challenged country in terms of development indicators, the fact that there is an ongoing conflict and that we're on the verge of economic collapse, but we're also challenged by a large geographic space without any infrastructure to speak of, with very, very poor communications networks and millions of people on the move. And so when it comes to the 5 areas in which we're particularly interested today, as you've just said, Panos, it's, I think, to be honest, it's a real challenge. And what I've tried to do as the humanitarian coordinator is remind all of us, whether we're from the donor community, whether we're from a UN agency, whether we're working for a non-governmental organization, is to remind all of us about some very simple concepts. And the first and most important one is listening to people who have been affected by the conflict or by the disaster or the crisis that has enveloped South Sudan. Asking open-ended questions. When I go into a community, and I've traveled extensively since the crisis began in December 2015, my default question to people is, how are you? How are things going? And often this baffles them. They're expecting a question which is more pointed, which is more specific, but I want the people who have been affected by this crisis to be able to choose into which direction they want to take the conversation, what the issues are that they want to raise, and often, quickly, it does result in feedback on their situation, needs that they may have. Complaints are common. Very often people will say that either the food assistance that they're receiving is insufficient in quantity or of not the right type. So, I mean, but I do believe that one of the most simple and effective measures is opening a conversation with a very, very broad question, which enables people to judge for themselves which issues they feel they need to put on the table. Listening attentively to their answers and then probing and not being so affected by a guideline that we may have received from our respective headquarters or a procedure that we may feel we have to go through because of a humanitarian country team mechanism or an intercluster working group checklist that's been developed. All of those mechanisms and procedures and checklists are useful, they're important, we use them, but I really underline in my conversations within the humanitarian country team and with NGO country directors whom I meet very regularly, the importance of our staff asking and listening in a way that empowers people to speak about their situation and demands of us sometimes adjusting our pace and doing things more slowly than we would like. And therein lies a tremendous tension, of course, because you often don't have time to do things slowly. These are life-threatening situations, and we're under considerable pressure to get things moving. So, you know, I think, Panos, by way of opening, you know, we've been fortunate in some situations here in South Sudan because we've got some people who are more accessible than others. Some people have gathered in camp-like situations or indeed fled into UN peacekeeping bases. And so in that sense, despite the fact that they are in camp-like situations, and I'm not a fan of that, I always think that a camp should be a last resort. It does make consultation with people more straightforward, more available. You can have more time to listen to women in particular, to the elders, the infirm, etc. and really have a feedback loop on our response to their needs, on our listening and working with people regarding their aspirations for the future, and that makes it easier. But outreach to the 2 million or so people who have been displaced and who are not in a camp-like setting, who are in spontaneous settlements or who indeed may be on the move very, very regularly, and South Sudan, by the way, is already largely a pastoralist society, it does make this particular issue ever more challenging. But I think we've got some interesting examples of where we've been able to adjust our program in light of what people have told us. It could have been as simple as listening to women talking about where they can access water points within a camp-like setting or close to the communities with whom they've sought shelter if they are out in the bush. And things of that nature, I think, have better informed our ability to respond. Over to you.
Thanks, Toby. I think you really raised two crucial points, and it's fantastic that I'm sure in your heavy schedule, you yourself and the team take the time to indeed slow down and do these two steps you talked about. One, the proactive listening, really taking the time and ask the simple questions. And two, is really taking action based on the feedback. As you said, adjusting the programs, the water points or the shelter, or better understanding the protection. And these are the two crucial steps, really, if we were to bring down in a simple way how to apply AAP, is one, to listen, and two, to take action based on what you listen, to adjust the program, to readjust the response, and then, of course, to give back. So, Toby, I just wanted to ask you if you can give us, you already alluded to a couple of examples, if you can give us a little bit more, some examples of what difference really has it made for the people putting in place the AAP in South Sudan. You mentioned a bit of water shelter. Do you want to elaborate a little bit? How did you go about it within the HCT, within the humanitarian community, in such a complex and big operation, to be able to go at midpoint and adjust what you're doing in terms of operations? Over to you.
Thanks very much, Panos. I've just got a couple of minutes left, and then I will be back for the entire session in the afternoon. So with your permission, let me be brief. Perhaps it would be useful for me to mention that as a humanitarian coordinator, you know, the power of coordination is in our ability to convince and persuade and to demonstrate leadership through our own action. We are not in a position to demand or instruct that an NGO or that a UN agency adopt a particular practice. So the leadership of the likes of you know, the Jasmine Whitbreads and yourself is also absolutely vital, that the message is reinforced of our commitment to AAP. But more specifically, a concrete example, I think, you know, in an area called Minkaman in Lakes State, this was a tiny hamlet of about 5,000 people that received 100,000 people in the space of 2 or 3 weeks at the height of the crisis. And the relationship between the displaced people who arrived and the host community was quite tricky early on, as one can well imagine. We have done very regular outreach to the host community, also to the IDPs, asking them what their concerns are, and it's not surprising. Safety was the first one. The second one, though, was the health situation, given acute overcrowding in a geographic space which was very, very small. And what we did was we sat with a group of teachers, a group of women, a group of community leaders, and developed a set of messages in local languages regarding hygiene practices, regarding other basic public health messages of how people could better manage a situation of overcrowding, where there was a certain scarcity of clean and portable water, to ensure that, to the extent possible, we were helping people not only stay safe in the sense of their security, but also safe in the sense of preventing a public health outbreak. And I think that listening to the concerns of people and then taking actions which were adopted to that local setting, of course, it's very easy in hindsight to say, but that's so obvious, you should have been doing it from the get-go. Well, the thing is, at the get-go, we had 100,000 people sleeping under trees. So at the get-go, we were thinking more about basic shelter. At the get-go, we were thinking about food. And it wasn't until some of the community members themselves, in particular from the host community, mentioned this concern about the possibility of cholera, which they had heard about on the radio because of the outbreak in Juba, that we were able to listen more attentively and adjust our program accordingly. So I'll leave that concrete example with you. If you don't mind, I'm going to have to excuse myself, but I'm very much looking forward to being with you throughout in the afternoon today.
Toby, really, thank you very much for taking the time this morning and really for giving the specific example and, more importantly, for bringing to life such a complex and huge operation like in South Sudan and showcasing both in terms of leadership but also the other members of the humanitarian family and the role that each played to bring it to life and ensure a more effective and a more accountable response. So we'll let you go. Thank you very much and looking forward to talking to you more this afternoon on the second rerun of this webinar. I'd like now to move to our next speaker, and I have here with me in Geneva, Prita Lowe. Prita, I want to ask you, you're the co-chair of the Accountability to Affected People Task Force. And when we talk about AAP, we talked about taking account, giving account, and being held to account. Practically, what do we mean? For colleagues who are really listening at the operations, how do they bring it to life? In the operational, how do they really make sure that they take the steps to make it happen? Prita, over to you.
Thank you, Panos. And good morning, afternoon to everyone who's listening in. I'll try, Panos, to explain in broad strokes what taking, giving, and being held to account, as you've just framed it, might look like, and perhaps focus a little bit on some normative issues as well as try to ground those as much as we can in the time we have for this particular slot. Going back to what we've heard about earlier, the responsible use of power, this combined with more effective and quality programming really is what constitutes the essentials of accountability in the work of humanitarian actors. However, humanitarian action that realizes these accountability commitments we've heard about earlier this morning, for that to happen, that what we've signed up to requires that we make some other key connections between accountability, placing human rights at the forefront of our work, and the centrality of protection. Jasmine spoke a little bit earlier about how we sometimes find ourselves surrounded by guidance of all sorts, principles, standards, and find ourselves a little lost in that situation. And how do we find a way beyond that? And I think here I'd like to just focus, before we get to these three specific components, on the integration of these mutually reinforcing core principles of humanitarian action and how they can help us, and this is important for us to recall, better support states, because that's really what our primary role is, better support states to fulfill their protection and accountability obligations, and through that also ourselves as humanitarian actors be more effective in bringing stability and normalcy to the lives of men, women, girls, and boys who are caught up in conflicts or other types of crises. In the humanitarian program cycle, now to ground that broader thinking that we need to always have at the front of our heads, is the humanitarian cycle. We have at our disposal through that the components of a system that can advance accountability. And by that, I mean needs assessments and analysis, strategic response planning, program design and implementation, operational monitoring and evaluation. But do we really use them well to serve accountability goals, which we've heard of so eloquently from the humanitarian coordinator in South Sudan, from Jasmine, from Panos in his introduction? Taking account means giving affected people influence over decision-making in a way that is inclusive, it's non-discriminatory, and accounts for the diversity of the communities we work with. Age, gender, and diversity must be considered when designing interventions based on needs assessments. Listening or collecting feedback alone, often referred to as participation and also in our commitments, is in itself not enough. Individual organizations and humanitarian actors at the collective level need to incorporate this feedback into their strategies and programs. Many organizations are now putting in place individual feedback mechanisms. The collective mechanisms are where we have a gap, and these can reinforce transparencies, create peer pressure, and have that constructive and sustainable impact that we're looking for when we embark on a program that will achieve accountability goals. Giving account is about sharing the information with communities in an effective and transparent manner. It is about information on agencies' roles and responsibilities. Who are we? What should communities that we're working with look to us for? What are their entitlements, and what are the criteria we use when we develop targeting ways of working so that the few resources that we have can be properly and used and really support the most affected or the most at risk, as well as the reasons why these change during the program cycle. So that type of constant sharing of information with communities is really critical. And how do we do that? How do we provide the feedback? How do we provide for platforms and ways in which communities can raise complaints and tell us about what we're doing well? Information needs to be shared in a way that communities can actually understand it and can be empowered by it to become active participants in the response. Being held to account means giving others the opportunity to assess and, if appropriate, sanction our actions. Affected communities are rarely in a position where they have the agency or power to select the organizations that support them during a crisis, nor the type of support they will get, at least initially, and their view on the quality of the service or response is not frequently sought. Being accountable involves actually asking communities what they think about the quality of the response at the individual agency and collective level. Affected populations should be involved in the monitoring of programs, and their point of view on the success and impact of a humanitarian intervention should be central to any evaluations. Sexual exploitation and abuse of affected community members by anyone associated with the provision of aid constitutes one of the most serious breaches of accountability. And the communities we work with should be able to raise complaints and call for appropriate protection against measures against such abuse. So to wrap that up, I said that taking account, giving account, and being held to account is necessary at the level of individual agencies, and many of us have these mechanisms in place, but it is also crucial at the collective level. The obligation to be accountable applies not only in emergencies, but also throughout the humanitarian response and the transition and development phases of our engagement with communities. Thank you. I hope that helps to get us started on thinking in terms of systems and how we can embed those in our work on accountability.
Thank you, Prita. I can see a very lively discussion on both the chat room and really provocative questions coming. So, Prita, I'm going to start taking live questions. I'll give two at a time, and please be brief because I can see there's a very live chat. First question is about the role of the donors. What role do you see the donors can play in making sure that agencies at the agency level, at the collective level, take accountability seriously and really implement it? And then the second question, which I would also like to ask, and if you could please address it as well, is one of the listeners is saying, well, Prita, it's all very good to tell us about the normative and the principle and the high level. Let me tell you, in reality, agencies arrive in operations with an already pre-prepared idea of what their mandate is and what they want to do before they even arrive. There is still in the 21st century this approach that we know better what you affected people, your needs are, and we are going to take care and we will decide for you what to give you. This is unacceptable, yet it is happening, the agency flag and mandate that is there. Prita, over to you.
Thank you, Panos. I guess I am right. The role of donors, let me take your first question first. I think that's a very important question, and I would just like to kick off by saying that it's very encouraging to see more recently some donors really becoming very engaged on the issue of accountability. We've seen that happening through frameworks that they're establishing or indicators that they're looking at in order to really ensure that agencies that get donor funding from specific donors are reporting on how effectively they meet the accountability commitments that they have signed on to as part of the IASC. Now that's very good. I think that is a little bit what maybe Jasmine was talking about earlier, the stick approach. But it is also a carrot when you place it in the context of donors. So that is important. It's a positive development. But I think the other side of what we would like to see donors do is really think about the adaptability, the flexibility of funding. I spoke a little bit about being able to go back to our programs, to speak to our systems a little bit. If we do indeed go in and assume we know better, design our programs without bringing back the continuous feedback of populations that we're working with, then we will fail on our accountability commitments. We have to be able to readjust. We have to be able to reprogram. And that is sometimes where we fall short because we are held back by what are perceived to be the interests of specific donors. And sometimes perhaps even that perception is not fully correct. But flexible funding that really is something we can adjust and change in the course of a program cycle is very critical to meeting our accountability commitments. So I would just put out the positive of what some donors have done and then where some of the gaps still lie on the side of donors. So the other point you raised, I think, is actually related to this. Where we go in, we think we know better, and we lose sight of perhaps that very real situation where we can communicate directly with people of concern and get their views to become central to the actions that we take. And you're right, I think mandates get in the way, but that's not the only thing that gets in the way, and you will probably see this as predictable. The person who asked the question, I can't really see who that is, but mandates, from my perspective, can also be quite important because it does place accountability on agencies. It gives us clear responsibilities and makes us accountable. If we have a mandate, we can be held to account to that mandate. But there is the other side of it, and I think you're very right that we frequently go into to a situation already with our minds made up as to what the community there needs and the view that we know better. And I can speak from example, from experience. In a situation in the last operation that I was in, when we had a serious displacement occurring in an area where many of us had not had access to previously, we went in as usual with packages of material assistance with many of our logos all pasted onto those nicely packaged pieces of, you know, soap, blankets, etc. And only to find that the populations that were displaced in that situation were actually not so terribly badly off in terms of the material assistance they needed. So they didn't need blankets. Their communities that they were moving to were actually housing them. They had, religious groups had set up whole systems for them, including kitchens, etc. What they wanted us to do was help them with documentation, which they had never had because they had been in such remote regions. They were now fleeing into more, you know, into established communities where there were government structures put in place already, and they could access them. They could finally get documentation. They wanted help to be able to get back, to have people go and bring the elderly out of the regions where they were still unsafe, and they had not been able to move them because they had fled with children very quickly, and the elderly who would have slowed them down had been left behind. So those are the kinds of things that we indeed should be thinking about. We should take a much broader approach to the work we do. Sometimes we really do think that we know better and go in with material assistance because we think that's the only thing that a community in crisis needs. It frequently is not. Communities we work with today are quite sophisticated. They know very well what is happening around them. They have communication means already in their hands, and they want to use those, and they want to bring their capacities to the work we do. So I can only agree with what the second question raised as a problem.
Thank you, Britta. I'd like now to move to our second case study and look a little bit at the Philippines and the operation that took place there. So I'd like to move to Sutapa, who is joining us from Australia, where she's now there after the end of her assignment. Sutapa, I'd like to ask you, what is the difference? We hear about individual accountability mechanism and collective accountability mechanism. Can you talk a little bit, based on your experience as the AAP advisor in the Philippines? And I also want to bring a question that we just got live from one of the callers. And Sutapa, if you can also talk about the accountability to populations who are not literate and how to go about really incorporating it in the response. Sutapa, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Yes, well, good evening here from Australia. And also, just also a big hello to everyone that's online from the Philippines, because I can see some very familiar names there. Panos, I'll answer your first question first. For the second one, in the Philippines, it wasn't so much an issue, so I don't know if that's actually better for another panelist, but let me start with the first question that you asked, and that was around whether or not both collective and individual level accountability is important. And I guess the short answer to that is yes. One example, I guess, from the Philippines in terms of individual agency accountability is that we worked with, and the reason I think it worked so well and the reason that collective accountability worked quite well in the Philippines is because we had a number of very, very strong agencies with very, very strong individual accountability mechanisms that already existed. These included agencies like FAO, UNICEF, Plan, ActionAid, World Vision International, Save the Children, and various others who ended up forming AAP working groups in Tacloban and in Rojas in particular, where they were particularly active. So I would say a very, very simple example of why individual accountability is important is if you're getting a feedback from the community that's in relation to a specific agency, perhaps a staffing issue, perhaps the behaviour of a staff member towards a beneficiary, that's something that an agency like perhaps World Vision International, if that was a problem that came through them, they would do and deal with individually. Whereas I very much agree with Preeta in that there is definitely a role for collective accountability, and the reason that that's important is because we can lobby much more strongly together when you do form as a group, and some issues are far more wide than agency specific. And we address some of that through setting up some collective mechanisms, our consolidated community feedback mechanism in both Tacloban and in Rojas. And the way that we did that was to have the individual agencies collect their feedback and then have a way of putting that together. So I think that sort of answers part of that question. I'll let you, Panos, ask if you wanted me to go into more detail on that one now, or if you wanted to address the literacy issue.
No, Sutapa, actually it would be good to go a little bit more on detail on this one, and if you can basically elaborate a little bit further with real-life examples on the collective mechanisms that were put in place in the Philippines on this one. And actually one of the callers is asking if you could also elaborate in particular to PSEA and how was this also raised in the Philippines. Over to you. Sutapa, we cannot hear you. Please make sure you unmute. Over to you. Sutapa, are you with us? Please come forward. Over to you.
Sorry about that, Panos. I had lost you for a bit there, but I caught most of what you said. So what I'll do is just continue with the example that I had from the Philippines, which was the collation of individual feedback from agencies. So basically, I guess the first step for it would be for individual agencies to collect their community feedback through their various mechanisms. What we would then do would be to bring them together, and the way that we did it in the Philippines was through AAP working groups in the different hubs that the individual agencies were active participants in. And through that, all the individual agency feedback that we had, we would compile through a consolidated community feedback form, and that varied in the hubs, and I can't emphasize enough how important it is to make sure that whatever feedback form you have or however you engineer that mechanism, it needs to be really relevant to where you're working in the district that you're working in, because Rojas was extremely different from Tacloban, for example. So again, through those AAP working groups, we compiled that consolidated feedback through the hubs in the relevant districts. And then we analysed some of that feedback for what the key themes or the issues that were arising across agencies. A very strong example of that was beneficiary selection criteria. This was something that came through very loud and clear as being not very clear to beneficiaries, and there was a lot of confusion around particularly around shelter, what were the key criteria for selection, what would be given, and this came across both in Rojas as well as in Tacloban. So going on to step 4 with that, when those key themes and issues started emerging like that, which is broader and across agencies rather than specific to one agency individually, what we would do in the hubs was we would share them with the relevant cluster, and the intercluster coordinator would share them at the intercluster coordination meetings at the hub level. And if it was just a hub level issue, it would be resolved there within a fortnight or within a week, depending on where we were in the response. So earlier in the response, when we first set this up, it was often weekly to fortnightly, and then as we came closer and closer into early recovery, it's sort of the frequency of that would be adapted according to need and according to the consolidated feedback we were getting. So again, at those intercluster coordination meetings, the different clusters would have a chance to listen to some of those key issues that were coming across those consolidated community feedback mechanisms. And also shelter cluster leads, for example, in this example, would have the chance to deal with it. Again, this would be taken back, and the actions for that would be taken back to the AAP working groups. And if it was something that was necessary to be raised at the national level, as AAP coordinator, I'd share that in the intercluster coordination meetings at the national level. And if necessary, again, and something that the humanitarian country team could lobby on or advocate for across agencies, it would be raised to that level. And so that's sort of step 5. I hope that helps, and I'm very happy to answer any questions.
So Tapa, we lost you again, but I think your 5 steps were really very clear, explaining particularly about this consolidated feedback mechanism and how you brought that at the cluster, at the inter-cluster discussion, with a specific follow-up action that was taken to adjust. So really we're coming back to the active listening and taking action based on that, and then if necessary to bring it at the capital level, at the ACT level as well. And that involved both UN, NGOs and government, local government actors listening to this feedback and taking action based on that in terms of what was said. So Tapa, I hope you can still hear me. There was a question we got about the application of PSEA in the Philippines. Can you say, please, a few words on that? Over to you.
I absolutely can. Sorry, there's a very, very important step that I missed in saying in those 5 steps, and that was that importantly, whatever happened and whatever actions were taken or not taken in that consolidated feedback process, very importantly needs to be communicated back to the communities that were asking those questions. To some extent it occurred, but I still think that was something that, and closing that feedback loop is something that we were working towards and getting better at as we got further into the response. One example of it getting back to the communities was working with IOM and a lot of our CWC colleagues to make sure we had clear messaging around beneficiary selection criteria for shelter that was then dispersed through various radio programs and also through really simple posters and messaging. So I just wanted to wrap up on that one. In terms of PSEA, in the Philippines, again, I think we only really started to scratch the surface on that. And one of the initiatives that we had around that was in Tacloban, and again, very joint collaborative effort with UNHCR, UNICEF, and again, a number of other agencies there. And it was specifically in relation to the military presence, which in Tacloban, which wasn't necessarily specifically PSEA, if you look under, you know, it being for humanitarian actors, but it was certainly an issue and it was something that we wanted to address collectively. So again, we came together on that and we decided that there was a need for a PSEA working group, which was started, but again, it was very towards the end of my mission there. So it was something that I think very much UNHCR and UNICEF continued to take leadership on after I left. Simple initiatives that were taken were for us to join and give collectively a workshop around PSEA for military actors in Tacloban, for example.
So Tapa, thank you so much. We will come back to you with more questions, but in the meantime, I'd like to move now to Kenya, where we have Nicola Series, who will talk a little bit also about the the Kenya example on applying accountability in a very interesting program that actually includes government and over 40 humanitarian organizations working on a drought-affected area and the mechanisms that have been put in place in order to take account and give back account and really bring to life the AAP. So Nicholas, if you could really highlight the Kenya example, and I would also like if you could answer the question related to literacy and how to deal with AAP with communities who may not be able to read or write. I also want to bring a question from one of the listeners who asks if you could please also explain a little bit further what do we mean collective accountability? What exactly, and I think this is what you are doing in Kenya. So Nicholas, a warm welcome and over to you.
Thank you, panelists. Good afternoon from Nairobi. In 2011, during the drought response in the Horn of Africa, we've conducted in partnership with a number of stakeholders, including government and non-government actors, an integrity analysis of the food assistance response, and with a strong focus on looking at people's views and what was done in terms of accountability to affected communities. And the feedback we've received from people was that although a number of accountability mechanisms were in place, they were always internal to a specific agency or a specific program. And from the people's point of view, because there were many actors responding to many needs, very often people didn't know whose agency was bringing what kind of aid and relief, and therefore they didn't know where to provide their feedback or their complaint. As a result, a lot of those feedback and complaint got lost and never reached the specific agencies that was concerned. The other key challenge from people's point of view was that although sometimes they knew those systems exist, they didn't have access. Sometimes they had to go to a specific office or to speak to a specific person, and that was not possible. So after that analysis and that study was published in early 2012, we've been speaking with state agencies and number of international and local NGOs on designing a collective accountability mechanisms that we started implemented last year. It's called Uwajibikaji Pamoja. It means accountability together in Kiswahili, and we are currently implementing that in 3 counties in northern Kenya with over 40 partners, including state agencies, international and local actors. So basically, how it works, it's people can provide their feedback or question related to any type of service provided by any organization at the county level. So it's working at the county level, and people can do so in three manners. They can use the web-based platform that has been developed and submit their feedback online. This is for the few people who have access to internet. They can do the same with an SMS toll-free number that is unique to the county, and they can also provide their feedback speaking to any of our 40 partners at county level. So we've agreed on a joint and a common complaint and feedback form that is being used by all our partners, and any agency can basically take the feedback on behalf of any other service provider at the county level. And each partner has now like a specific credential and login, and they can log in and upload the complaints and feedback into the system, and this is now referred automatically to the organization that is concerned by that feedback. So what is collective accountability? It's basically the system, the way it has been designed. It's a one-stop shop for people to report. So each agency can take the feedback on everybody's behalf. But of course, like now, the resolution of that complaint remain with, you know, the privilege and of each agency. The other thing is that if you have like one system, one way for people to report, one number, one web-based platform, the messaging is easier for people to understand, and we don't face the issue of confusing people with multiple reporting mechanisms. The message are the same, and they are integrated in each agency's outreach to affected populations. So we've designed joint information and communication material, and in northern Kenya the illiteracy rate is very high. So we wanted to ensure that people are not left out because they cannot write an SMS or fill a form. So we're using two main channels to ensure that people who cannot read and write can access the system. The first one, it's through frontline staff of our 40+ partners agencies who speak the local language and are able to have a direct interaction with communities, and now take the feedback on their behalf and upload it in English now into the platform, so people don't have to fill it by themselves and can speak their own language to report their complaint. The other one has been the use of the local FM, the local radio. Each month we are conducting a joint radio show with our partner. That's 1 hour interactive forum that is done in sometime in Kiswahili, sometime in the vernacular languages, and that provides also an avenue for people to call in the radio directly and ask their question directly to ourselves or to our partners. Another element that we've just developed, like we're using also that system as a two-way communication. So far, and in the last year, we have like 1,800 people who have interacted with the system through SMS. And now we have a database of phone numbers from communities in those locations, and we're using this SMS database to broadcast early warning information to people. So that's also like a function that is available for our partners when they have early warning information to make available to people. So maybe I'll stop here for now, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Thanks, Nicola. It's interesting to see your diagram and really how, from a collective point of view, you brought to life this respect, engagement, discussion with the affected community and bringing back the feedback. Can you tell us very, very briefly, because now we're starting to run out of time, was this an expensive undertaking when you sat with the 45 organizations? Was it something that was easy to put in place from a collective point of view to bring this feedback to the agencies and, most importantly, to the affected communities and to improve the programs? If you can tell us in 2 words, what's the cost of it and how easy was it to put it in place?
Well, I think it's not. It was very time intensive, but not necessarily very resource intensive. I mean, one of the challenge was really to convince that big number of state and non-state organizations to work collectively on the joint accountability mechanisms for affected population. And I think as long as agencies understood that they would only be able to see the complaints and feedback that are related to their own agencies, because each partner has a specific login and credential, agencies were quite comfortable, like working together. The cost of it is actually quite cheap. I mean, like for 1 month in one county, the cost is approximately €3,000, and that's just the hosting of the web-based platform, the SMS toll-free, so that we cover the cost for the SMS, so that the charge is not on the people. And we have one person based at county level who's coordinating that initiative. But we've made sure that there is a contribution from our partners. For example, the coordinator of that mechanisms at county level is hosted by one partner agencies for free. We don't have operational budget for outreach. The outreach are integrated into our partners' daily operations. The management is done like jointly through monthly coordinated meetings that are hosted like on a rotational basis by our partners. So we've really ensured that we make the cost as minimum as possible, so that this initiative can be sustained and handed over at county level.
Thanks, Nicolas. I'd like to move now to Prita here in Geneva. And Prita, we're getting many colleagues listening who have the same question, which is, each situation is different. Each operation is more humanitarian, more development, more emergency. Obviously, the AAP response support may need some tailor-making. If we need some help, somebody is asking, where do we go? Is there really like a help desk or a person or somebody who we can write to? So, Prita, over to you.
Thank you, Panos. Yes, I'm really happy to see that question coming up, because we'd like to take this opportunity actually to launch a help desk, precisely to address the sorts of issues that we're seeing highlighted in the questions here. How do you tailor AAP into very specific situations? We're just launching that help desk now. Colleagues can call in, and also online, of course. We'll have two ways in which we will respond to questions and requests for support and guidance. One will be through actually a sort of Q&A arrangement, and there's I think up on the screen now the details on how to get to that help desk. And secondly, we'll also be able to perhaps point you in the direction of experts who can really address very specific situations or types of challenges. So we'll have both a kind of Q&A possibility as well as directing you to very, experts who are really well-versed in the specific issues that you're facing as a challenge. So I hope everyone can see that on their screens. If not, it's basically you would go to helpdesk-aap-psea@unhcr.org. And then there are also, of course, as we indicated earlier on, a set of, I think, very helpful tools that can be used, and some of them really do speak to very simple things that we can do very immediately and that are adaptable to many situations. Thank you.
Prita, just a follow-up question to you. What is the link between the AAP and centrality of protection? In 2 words. Okay. I know it's unfair to say in 2 words, but because we really have about 6 minutes left.
All right. Well, I will try to do it in 2 words. It is indeed one that's hard to do that briefly. However, let me just go very quickly to the key issues. I won't speak to what's been said, as and everyone's familiar with the ISC statement on the centrality of protection. And we can always take a second look at that and understand it better if we need to. But effective protection delivery really does require us to meet accountability commitments, several of which, as we've discussed already this morning, outline the practical ways in which protection can be realized. So for protection to inform humanitarian action, we must be able to identify who is most at risk and why, and develop a comprehensive and community-based approach to the response and to our advocacy. I keep going back to this again, and to our advocacy with states, with civil society and community-based organizations, and recognizing the complementary roles of these components of humanitarian action, whether we talk about the centrality of protection, AAP, or placing human rights at the forefront, is something that we've tried to pull together, and some of the resources that can really guide us on this have been recently released in a protection mainstreaming training package that highlights accountability to affected populations as one of the 4 pillars of protection mainstreaming. And I'd encourage you to go to that document, since I can't speak to this for much longer right now. It's a package, it's a hefty package, but it's a very easy to use package. It's the Protection Mainstreaming Task Team that's pulled it together, and I have it in my office. It's available online. I think it's been actually mailed around to a lot of operations, so I would just really ask that you take a look at that, and indeed come back to us at the help desk as well, and we can clarify this in very concrete ways for colleagues who are still wanting more information on that particular point.
Thanks, Peter. I'd like now to move to Sutapa. And Sutapa, we have a question from Sweden, which really asks about the role of the needs assessment for the empowerment of affected people so they can freely decide on the issues and what they would like to see. The caller is saying that some agencies conduct mainly specialized needs assessment that are only covering the sectors where they supply services to. We're going back to the question of mandates and our preconceived package ability strength versus what the real needs are, and how these needs are taken into account in deciding the programs. Sutapa, what are your reflections on that?
I can definitely say that for the Philippines, needs assessments should be front and center of accountability, or front at least. They are a really great way to be able to get a community response from the outset of exactly what the real needs and the community needs are. A good example of this from the Philippines, and I know it was mentioned, I think also by Preeta before, was the delivery of a lot of NFIs that weren't necessarily particularly relevant by agencies. When we later did an asked action review, which was collaborative across 9 different agencies, we had a collective team go and do disaggregated community consultations. We found that actually what people wanted was autonomy, and what could provide them with some of that autonomy was the provision of cash. So things like that, that's why needs assessments are so important from the outset. And again, listening to communities about what their needs are from the outset are particularly important, because they know what they need often a lot better than we do. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Sutapa. Nicola, I'm going to come to you with the very last question, and I'm going to be even more unfair and ask you to answer in a minute or less if possible, which is really, how can we ensure, the question is, how can we ensure accountability?
Oh, we just lost Panos again. That was swapping headphones.
So, Nicola, I hope you can hear me. The question is about how really to ensure accountability in conflict zones or in highly insecure countries like Somalia. Is it possible to put it in place in such areas, and if yes, how? Over to you.
Well, I think when agencies don't have or have a limited access, it is indeed more difficult to engage with people. But I think and Somalia could be a good example. Like technology can really help, and having hotlines or similar system than the one we have designed for Kenya, where people can provide their feedback through SMS, through a hotline, the use of community radio and local FM can really provide an interesting avenue for agencies to engage with communities and ensure that they can be held accountable.
Nicola, thank you very much. Indeed, it's a challenge in this difficult, high and secure conflict areas, but I really appreciate your feedback. I'm afraid we're running out of time. We have run out of time. I'd like to highlight, first of all, to everybody the quiz that we have provided to all, asking you to assess this webinar, to give us your feedback, in particular, since we are repeating it at 4 p.m. Geneva time. We just want to see how to take into account what you've just said. I also want to highlight the fact that in your screen, you can see there is a link to some background documents that have been prepared for this webinar with very useful practical tips in terms of how it was put in place, and all speakers have provided input for this one. I can also see there's been a number of questions on PSEA, and I can see a chat going on there. There's so many questions on PSEA that actually I think we will do a more dedicated webinar to try and look into this particular issue. Some of you have also suggested why we didn't have somebody from an affected community to be also a speaker on this webinar. An excellent point. Actually, we also thought about it ourselves. At the end, for practical reasons, we're not able to pull it together for this time, but I can see, given the huge interest on this topic, we will certainly have a follow-up and try to bring this more into the next one. So at this point, I'm afraid I'm going to bring to a close this discussion. I'd really like to thank all of you who have participated and actively, both with the chat, with the questions. I want to particularly thank our speakers and the 3 case studies that were presented from the field, and of course the normative here from Geneva. So a really big thank you. I hope that this helped all of you to provide you with some practical steps, or to better more unpack and explain the accountability to affected people and how to bring it to life in a respectful and dignified way, and to make it really the center of our response and in the operations. So I just want to really say thank you to all, and we're looking forward to hearing from you in terms of the application of hopefully what you learned. And don't hesitate to also come to the help desk and ask for support, advice, in order really to tailor-make and take forward the AAP into your own operation. So wish you all a good day, and all the very best with your work wherever you are. Thanks again, and goodbye from us here in Geneva.